Here we go. Jake and Josh are here to analyze the game they love for the team they love. This is another Dolphins podcast. Here's your host, Jake Mendel and Josh Houtz.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of another Dolphins podcast. We have plenty to get to on today's show. But first, Joshua Houtz, it's Friday, my dude.
It's Friday, man, and it's freaking weekend, baby. Let's have some fun. We get to come on here and talk about the Dolphins. Looking forward to the weekend for sure. How was your day today, Jake? How are you doing this fine Thursday evening, night, whatever it is?
Josh, what's your phone carrier? Did you hear what happened today?
I know they're saying it was like they were just saying the towers were down. But then there were other people saying it was a cyber attack.
So first, you're an AT&T guy? I'm an AT&T.
I am, but I've been around Wi-Fi all day, so I didn't really notice anything. Did you experience any outages?
Yeah. My phone was out till about 1 p.m, and I actually read a report on what really happened. Did you read this? Did you see this?
Was it the solar flare? I see a bunch of hunches. I had no idea what was honest or telling, or I thought it was all just hypotheses at that point.
So I hear that it was the CEO of AT&T got into his office Thursday morning, and he had his stack of newspapers. Right, you get in, and you need to see what's going on in the world. He was going through the stack, New York Times, Washington Journal. There's just this like manila envelope in there. And he opens it up and it just says, the Dolphins should trade Jaylen Waddle. And all of a sudden he just decided, we got to burn this whole thing down. This makes no sense. We got to go back to asking Jeeves. People can't have this much power on the internet, man, because that was enough to let's shut it all down. If the Dolphins are trading Jaylen Waddle, we got to start going backwards because this is getting ridiculous.
I honestly thought they figured out what it actually was, and I'm sitting here like on pins and needles waiting to see what you said. But yeah, it was right after that Mike Tannenbaum thing came out. They just decided to shut everything down because it was. I understand the trade, right? He was on Get Up.
No, what was the trade? In case people don't know.
Trade Trent McDuffie, cornerback for the Kansas City Chiefs, to Miami for Jaylen Waddle. And Trent McDuffie's a great player, right? Nobody can sit here and argue that. We saw what he did to Tyreek Hill several times this season. But to give up your young playmaking wide receiver, when we've already heard Tyreek Hill say he doesn't know how long he's going to last, it was just crazy. But it did come from Mike Tannenbaum. We do have to mention that. But Dolphins Twitter was in disarray. I threw an article up on the Finsider, and it just went to the moon. And it's just so crazy that simple things like that do so big numbers. But Jake, what were your thoughts when you first saw it? Because I admittedly just ignored it. And then I think it was 2 or 3 days later, I finally saw it and I was like, this is what everyone's so upset about.
It was fantastic because you're just like scrolling through Twitter and minding your own business, which is something you can't really do anymore. But then you just get this post where you see like Tannenbaum's forehead and you see him like waving his hands around. And it's just like proposed Tannenbaum trade, Dolphins, Waddle, Kansas City Chiefs, McDuffie, and man, it pushed me over the edge because we've been doing so well these last couple of weeks. We're dealing with the Tua crisis that people can't really accept what's going to happen, that, odds are Tua is going to get extended. The Dolphins have the fewest amount of players under contract in all of the NFL in 2024, and yet they have negative $50 million in cap space. So we are already a panicking bunch. But to go a farther step and say, hey, one of Miami's best assets, a wide receiver on a rookie deal who's a absolute combo breaker with Tua Tagovailoa as his quarterback, to say the Dolphins should go ahead and trade this guy to a team that just won the Super Bowl without needing that top tier wide receiver, which is an entire different conversation. But Josh, the Dolphins just scored 7 points in the playoffs, and a former GM who spent years upon years making millions and millions of dollars thought Miami's path to success is let's trade players on offense. What?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. And to think again that a team that, I think you said it, my thing was cutting out a little bit, but the Kansas City Chiefs have won 2 Super Bowls now without Tyreek Hill. So do they really need a playmaker like Jaylen Waddle? And again, at some point, we're going to wish that we re-sign Jaylen Waddle because he is a top 10 wide receiver. I have his numbers down, man. 3 seasons with over 1,000 yards?
Franchise record, I'm fairly certain.
Yeah, franchise record. I think he led the league with 18.1 yards per catch in 2022. Every year he gets better, but there is that injury concern. Again, I just think it was a little bit funny that this was something that they just had to throw out there, right? They were doing all these hypothetical trades, and us on Dolphins Twitter, man, we eat that crap up, don't we?
Oh, and Barry Jackson, he nailed it. He just was like, I'm going to write a little, I think it was Barry. It was someone at the Miami Herald, I think, also wrote a little story about it. Just, it was like a volleyball set where you're just giving it to like the biggest person on your team to spike it. It was just one of those situations where you just kind of sit there, you stop and think, man, like this just makes zero sense. And, you know, you kind of see where Tannenbaum was going. If this was like a Madden trade with like zero depth to it, the Chiefs, they don't have wide receivers. I'm not thinking about the fact they just won the Super Bowl throwing to former Mecole Hardman, who spent half the season with the Jets. Like, he won the game sealing touchdown. Like why isn't Tannenbaum thinking about these things as making this argument to why the Chiefs, who just won a Super Bowl off a stellar defense, should trade their premier piece for a receiver on a team that just proved it didn't need the wide receiver? Don't get me wrong, man. I do think someone like Jaylen Waddle would make the Kansas City Chiefs offense much, much better. But the Chiefs are at a point, and they're mastering it to perfection, is they're understanding how they can win football games with their roster, right? They might not be able to get to 34 points every game like they did with Tyreek Hill, but give Patrick Mahomes one shot in the fourth quarter in a one-score game, he'll make everything else happen. He'll do what he has to in order to get that game-sealing touchdown. And we like to think about it as overall points per game, but like the situational football that the Chiefs have accomplished is just so damn impressive to kind of think that not only should they, push all the chips in on offense, but to weaken the defense, man. Like, and I'm not even trying to hate on Waddle or what he does for the Dolphins, because he's absolutely awesome. But if I'm the Chiefs, man, I'm sitting there like, you're doing stuff just to do stuff, and that's like the worst reason to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we can be honest with ourselves, right? Patrick Mahomes is an alien. I think we joked, or I said it in the DMs, like he could legit win a Super Bowl with Isaiah Ford and Lynn Bowden Jr. in that receiving corps that Tua Tagovailoa had. But you're right, man. You asked what Mike Tannenbaum was thinking when he threw this out there. I don't think he was thinking, right? He was just throwing crap against the wall, hoping to get those views, the engagements, things like that. I do have to throw out Trent McDuffie, how well he did this year. PFF has him at 82.9 overall, 70.7 against run, 91.7 pass rush, and then a 78.3 coverage. He had 5 forced fumbles, 3 sacks, and 70 tackles this year. Again, we saw him pick Tyreek's pocket. So he's a great player. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, he is on a rookie deal. The Dolphins do have some need for a cornerback. So you could kind of see why they would say this. But again, 2 years down the road, a year down the road, when Tyreek Hill rides off into the sunset to play video games like he's hinted at before, you're going to wish you had Jaylen Waddle. And I do have to throw this out there because I do think next year would be his 5th year option. If Dolphins pick it up this year, he'd get it next year. Is that correct? Or no, next year.
They can pick it up this year.
Okay. Yeah. And that would be $17 million projected. And then actually Spotrac had his long-term deal at 4 years, $92 million, $23.1 million per season. That was up there with AJ Brown and some of those big number guys. So, I mean, that's kind of what you can already foresee what you might have to pay Jaylen Waddle. Obviously, you're going to have to pay Trent McDuffie at some point as well. But I just don't think that you thin down your offense like we've seen when Jaylen Waddle or Tyreek Hill's not in the lineup. The offense turns into a pumpkin almost, except that one game when it was just Jaylen Waddle out there. Didn't he go ballistic? And why you would do that to that offense who desperately needs these playmakers. So I do like what the Chiefs are doing, though, right? I mean, they were this high-octane offense for so long, and now they're kind of transforming into this defense-first mentality, and it's just goes to show you that there's a variety of different ways to win in the NFL. The Dolphins just have to figure out their way to do it.
And I like that. That's a really good point. And I think there's something, too, where like Tua and Jaylen Waddle, man, the combination I just think is so perfect for both of them. I mean, I would like to think it was just as simple as injuries late in the year that really derailed any type of production from Jaylen Waddle, because the connection those guys have, it's out of this world. I mean, he went from his rookie season, he led the league in receptions, and the next year he led the league in yards per reception. I mean, if that's not versatility right there, I don't know what else to tell you. I understand, like, yes, the Chiefs could use a wide receiver, and yes, the Dolphins could use a cornerback, but Josh, I think, and I might be assuming quite a bit here, so please feel free to jump on this, but Chris Grier, he hasn't really felt like someone who, if he has ever made one, we don't know for sure, if he has ever made a mistake, I don't think he's ever been someone to admit it. And if you're willing to kind of push away Jaylen Waddle, who, you could write poems about how masterfully he danced up and down the draft in order to move back and then move back up to get Waddle, and you're still getting picks, how great that was. If you're willing to, bite that bullet in order to say we beefed it at cornerback with a 2nd round pick with Cam Smith, that does not sound like something Chris Grier would ever do.
That's the point we're at. I mean, again, we're just speaking about a hypothetical trade, and honestly, we got a lot of time to fill this offseason. So we might do things like this more often, especially when Dolphins Twitter is in absolute disarray. But yeah, I love the chemistry that Tua Tagovailoa and Jaylen Waddle have developed over the years, and I know we all saw Tyreek Hill tweeted out like him and Jaylen Waddle were throwing shade at this fan base. Yeah, from Greece, he's throwing shade at the fan base, and he's like, Jaylen Waddle and Tua, they're on another level. They'll be here way after I leave or something like that. And it just kind of put things into perspective, right? That Tyreek Hill already sees the end of the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess. And you're going to want a playmaker like Jaylen Waddle. I did have some notes written down here, Jake. I found a little interesting because I remember in 2021 when he was a rookie, he was kind of, said he was kind of confined to a box. I looked up his number. He played 24.5% of the snaps in the slot last season, 74.2 out wide, and then this season 24.3% in the slot, 74.3% out wide. So it's almost the exact identical numbers. Obviously, he missed some games this season, but the fact that they're finding a way to utilize him much differently than we saw his rookie season when he led the league in receiving, you're seeing him start to open up that game. I guess the only negative that you and I guess a lot of Dolphin fans would have is some of those balls where he just jumps and, doesn't use his hands and tries to catch his body, things like that. But he is just an absolute stud. And I think if you're looking at this without Homer lens on and you say, okay, Dolphins bring in Trent McDuffie, that secondary, the defense gets a lot better. You have him on that rookie deal. I can understand that, but I just do not want to see Jaylen Waddle on any other team anytime soon.
Homer lenses. Tua in his third off season, he learned how to fall. Jaylen Waddle in his third off season, it'd be fantastic if he could also learn how to fall. Man, I don't know if you remember this, but I think it was the Patriots game. He had this awesome touchdown in the back corner of the end zone, and he went up and he caught it well. And he just landed on his back, and it looked like the most painful thing ever. And I think it was week 7, 8, maybe even a little sooner than that. We saw him on the injury report with a back injury or just back complaints, and you see that on NFL Network. You'll see a commercial with that touchdown. So yes, I agree. I think that's the one gripe, but overall, I think this is not a conversation that should be had whatsoever. I think you're super happy with Jaylen Waddle in Miami, and you're super happy with Trent McDuffie if you're the Kansas City Chiefs. Josh, Dan Graziano, he put an interesting little bit out there. Now, it's interesting. On top of that, I'm hitting you all with an interesting squared here, but the idea that 10, 15 years ago, how much would we care about just a 15-second SportsCenter ESPN clip now that we can actually capture it in time? I mean, I remember a few years back, there was No Sean Marino talking about coming to Miami, I think it was. And I remember tweeting about just a clip I saw on SportsCenter, and everyone got very, very mad at me. There were articles written about me after that one. But not only did it end up happening, but it was just a little clip, a little it seemed like insight, this guy thought this. So Josh, Dan Graziano believes, and he was fairly confident about this on ESPN. He said that Miami won't let Christian Wilkins leave. Is it that simple? Is it as simple as a 15-second clip of, saying good player stays, end of discussion?
I mean, kind of, really. But I mean, when we're looking at the salary cap, I got to say no. Aren't we still $52 million over the cap? I mean, I know they have this franchise tag to use, and I think we probably literally posted the podcast, and then the next day he probably released that, saying that's almost as good as done. So I don't think that we can sit here and count the chickens before the eggs hatched, I think is the way it goes. But I do think the Dolphins would be foolish to let Christian Wilkins, a player of that magnitude that should have a very, should be very attractive on the open market. You should know that you do not let him walk for peanuts. Yes, you're going to get that compensatory pick, but if you can franchise tag him, hopefully, work out a long-term deal, because we all want Christian Wilkins to stay. We don't know how the salary cap works. We've been told it's fake our entire life. Prove that. Prove it's fake. Lock Christian Wilkins up. But if you can't do that, then you have a team like maybe the Bears. I keep throwing them out there because I know they have a massive amount of cap space. But one of these teams that has a ton of money, has some draft capital that they can move, maybe give you a second round. I'm just throwing numbers out there, but I would not let Christian Wilkins walk for nothing, even though you are going to get a compensatory pick.
Just throwing numbers out there. The one stat with Wilkins that we don't talk enough about, and it's super unfair, is we spent a whole year talking about sacks, and good thing Christian Wilkins got his 2 sacks against the Jets and Panthers. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a good player if he didn't get 2 sacks against, Bryce Young and Zach Wilson. Otherwise, we don't want him. Dude, this guy plays more snaps at one of the most physical positions than any other player in the entire league. I mean, the Dolphins are sitting high with the idea that you have Christian Wilkins, who ranks first, and Zach Sealer, who's always third or fourth. That to me, man, like we've talked a lot of circles, and you see a lot of people doing mock drafts. It's just we have a lot of time to think and digest these things. Your opinions are going to change over time. And a little peek behind the curtain, we're thinking about doing a show where we kind of role play as some GM or some agents trying to call the Dolphins about, let's get these players in Miami. And Merrick and I went a little back and forth in the DMs, like, because he wanted to do Christian Wilkins. And I was like, all right, let's play this out. And the idea that the Dolphins are $50 million over the salary cap, franchise tag is another $20 million. And then if you want to sprinkle in the idea, maybe they'll trade him after that. You have 2 weeks to trade him. Otherwise, that is a $20 million cap hit you still have to clear. That's a lot of junk that Chris Grier would have to do. And Merrick seemed to believe it was possible. And as the days go on, as I hear someone like Dan Graziano say that the Dolphins aren't going to let Wilkins walk, I'm starting to think that not only will he, not walk, but I think he might just remain in Miami. And that's something I wouldn't be able to poo-poo no matter how hard I tried.
Yeah, I have no idea how it works. I mean, I can't even sit here and fathom it. I do think it's funny, though, that last offseason, everyone was sitting there, talking about Christian Wilkins' next deal. We should lock him up for this number because he doesn't have those sacks. And then he comes out here and just, leads career high in sacks and all those things. But you're right, Jake. This is a guy that did not come off the field much last year, right? They did not like to rotate those defensive linemen because, let's be honest, we really didn't have many people to rotate up front. So, again, I kind of joked that when Anthony Weaver took this job, he was eyeballing a Christian Wilkins, Zach Sealer tandem up front. Like you said, you keep hearing these experts and analysts and these people that actually have, I don't want to put myself down, you probably have more sources, Jake, than I've ever had. But we're sitting here and we don't know much of anything, right? All we hope is that the Dolphins can find a way to lock up Christian Wilkins and get under the salary cap. Because again, I don't pity Chris Grier at all. I don't, I'm not envious of what he has to. Yeah, it's not our money. And I kind of feel a little bit bad for Chris Grier, but he's the one that got us in this situation, right? He's the one that set these things up. I just don't know what type of magician he has to, he has to pull all sorts of rabbits out of his hat. And I'm intrigued to sit back and watch this all unfold. And hopefully when it's all said and done, we do have Christian Wilkins, tugging at Josh Allen, pissing him off at the bottom pile, doing whatever he does to get under all those quarterbacks' skin.
So there is a point where like every dollar matters, but I see people arguing this about Tua quite a bit, and I think it's fair for every player. If you're talking about someone who's going to get paid like a premier at their position, someone you're not going to be able to instantly like snap your fingers and replace. Yes, I know Skylar Thompson could instantly replace Tua. I understand that. But what I'm trying to get at is like a lot of people were saying, hey, Tua wants 50. I wouldn't go a hair over, $44 million. And, you're trying to argue down to that $6 million. But in the grand scheme, as you kind of like think about that $6 million doesn't really mean a whole lot in the grand scheme. Yes, it's $6 million, but cool. The Dolphins spent $15 million on Emmanuel Ogbah. Sethan Carter was making $4 million per year for some time here, being a special teams pro. Justin Bethel's in the same boat. I'm not trying to hate here. What I'm trying to say is that, like, when you have these players and you're that close, right? Christian Wilkins wants to reset the market at $27 million. You're willing to offer $24 million a year. Is that really the difference? Are you really willing to kind of stand pat just so you can have Sethan Carter on the roster? That's where I'm starting to kind of push to, where if they sign him long-term, they can work it in a way where both him and Tua can combine to cost less than $20 million on the salary cap this year. That sounds pretty exciting. I think there's also, I meant to do more research on this beforehand, but the salary cap is going to be like $8 million more than this year than it was originally projected. Now, something about that to keep in mind too is everyone thinks the Dolphins instantly have $8 million more. That's what they can use to sign players. That $8 million for this year doesn't mean as much when everybody gets it. Because just as you can pay more for a player, so can every other team. But I think that can be helpful, seeing these shocking bumps. F it. Let's pay Tua. Let's pay Christian Wilkins. It might seem a little wonky now, but you get an extra 6% bump there, 7% bump there. That investment you made, I think, helps you more in the future than this impression of, oh, we just found $8 million underneath the couch cushion. That's great, but so did everybody else. And it's no longer an advantage for you.
And we talked about before, but how much of this is setting a precedent, right? I mean, we talked about the Bradley Chubb trades, the Tyreek Hill trades, and they instantly snap their fingers and pay those guys. At some point, Dolphin fans are skeptical. Should we pay Tua? Should we let Christian Wilkins walk? At what point are you going to retain these great players that you suddenly have stumbled upon, right? We got Jalen Phillips coming up. We got Javon Hahn. We got Jaylen Waddle. I'm saying that out loud. That's a lot of money. But again, we sat here. There's ways you can structure this thing. find a way to work this thing, get those cap numbers down as bare minimum as you can this year, bring in the players, load up, and hopefully make a run again this season. But again, I do not want to see Christian Wilkins walk, and I do not want to see Tua Tagovailoa walk. Although I do, again, want to see a bit more when it hits January. But this is not a Tua Tagovailoa podcast. Not at all.
I can't believe Daniel Jeremiah had to do this to us, Josh. He released his mock draft 2.0, which I think the wording and labeling of these mock drafts are so funny. And I had to ask, and I think this should be in your range. Do you remember Lion King 1.5?
I think we actually watched it like a couple months ago. So it kind of. I'm not going to be able to sit here and tell you the plot or anything like that.
I was just thinking about how, these mock drafts, they do 1.0, 2.0. I'm like, we never get to 1.5. And I think Lion King was the one successful franchise to ever pull off a 1.5. Long story short, I did Wikipedia to refresh myself. I think it was just the first Lion King from Timon and Pumbaa's view. I'm fairly certain it's just kind of them, how they met. Timon didn't fit in with all the what am I doing? What I'm trying to get at, though,
I'm loving it. I'm nerding out over here. I'm loving it.
This is off-season content, baby. This is what we do. But Jeremiah's mock draft 2.0. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna butcher this. His last name's Latu, the UCLA defensive end, at pick number 21 for the Dolphins. 13 sacks, 2 fumbles, 2 interceptions last year. He had to medically retire due to a neck injury in 2020. Considering the Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips injuries, that's why Daniel Jeremiah started going that direction. Josh, I'm throwing a bunch of stats at you about this, mostly because I couldn't pronounce his name and had to kind of fill time there. But let me know your thoughts here. I wrote a little story about it on the Finsider. At first, I was kind of all in still on Jackson Powers-Johnson, going with that offensive line. But another thing, I sat around, thought about this for a little bit, kind of made sense.
Yeah, and this is why it's so foolish. I mean, I respect to everybody that does mock drafts this early, right? But I mean, free agency hasn't hit. We know all the holes. So I'm okay. Yeah, I'm okay either way. I guess my original thought was this. You said he played for UCLA, right? And had to medically retire. That sounds a lot like Jalen Phillips, right? So we know how much, and I know this really doesn't matter, but I keep going back to when Mike McDaniel said one of his favorite positions to watch is the edge position, and how it's just like his favorite position on the field. So he's complained before about having a first round pick. I mean, maybe they go edge here. So yeah,
you might have just cracked the code.
It's hard to move on from Jackson Powers-Johnson when we are looking at offensive line right now. We're bringing back Teron Armstead and Liam Eichenberg and hopefully Rob Hunt, right? But yeah, man, I'd be okay with edge here. I mean, the one thing that the Dolphins do very well is they kind of fill holes throughout free agency, kind of bring in some depth pieces, and then go into the draft and kind of just go best player available, at least so it seems, right? We saw Cam Smith last year. I don't think any of us thought they were going to go cornerback at that point. So, yeah, they could definitely go edge here, especially with Jalen Phillips being injured, Bradley Chubb's injured, Andrew Van Ginkel's might not be back. So I could definitely see him going that route.
Super hot take here, man. Super hot take. I love what you said about McDaniel. I think that those are excellent points, and that actually got me super excited. So the Dolphins, I think we've said it 6 times on this podcast now, are $50 million over the salary cap. And another team that really works in the trenches like this, where they're really leaning heavily into the salary cap doesn't exist, is the Saints. And I think it was last year the Saints tried to make a couple upgrades, and they couldn't because they didn't have a lot of salary cap space. Well, what did they do? They said, F it, we're going to trade a future first-round pick for a first-round pick this year. What would your impression be, Josh, where if the Dolphins can't make a lot of decisions in, free agency, they might get a comp pick year or two down the road, but they do find a way to keep Christian Wilkins. Like, they're still warping the salary cap, but not so much so where we got to bring in these new guys to replace. But what would you do in a situation where you could get Latu at pick 21, and then you trade your second round pick this year and maybe next year's first? McDaniel gets his 2 firsts this year, and then maybe it's pick 24, 25. You got Jackson Powers-Johnson, or maybe there's another offensive lineman you like there. What would your thoughts be there? They don't have a 3rd or a 4th round pick, so this would be it for their draft. But yeah, man.
I'm liking where you're going with this, because I mean, we're sitting here talking about how the Dolphins window might be closing, and this, that, and the other thing go all in the draft, right? I mean, we see them trade these picks and bring in these high contract players. So, dude, I would not be against that. I thought you were going to say they were going to completely trade out of the first round. And I was sitting there just thinking about how sad I'd be because you sit there and watch all those picks. No, you watch all the picks come through and then you're sitting there and they trade out and it's like they're no 33rd pick or something. You're just like, I can just go to bed. But I do expect them maybe to potentially trade down. So that's definitely an option out there. But, dude, if they were to, say Jackson Powers Johnson or Latoa, I'm butchering that either way. And then they trade back up and then get the other one. I mean, that would be the perfect way to build this roster and to keep it young, right? And under the cap, because that's the way that these teams are building their teams through the draft and not missing on a Cam Smith or a Channing Tindall or some of those guys. But as we said, man, Anthony Weaver's going to get the most out of Channing Tindall.
Daniel Jeremiah's 1.0 mock draft had the Dolphins selecting LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. I think he had the Bills selecting them 2.0, so he falls another 8 slots. Josh, what would your thoughts be on Dolphins going with a wide receiver, considering the volume you give to Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, especially Tyreek Hill? It's just out of this world.
Yeah, I mean, I'd support that, right, Jake? I mean, we're sitting here talking about when Tyreek Hill maybe rides off in the sunset, potential absolutely ridiculous trades with Jaylen Waddle. We know the Dolphins need another target in that offense. That's really how this offense can take the next step. So we've talked about it all year long about needing that big body type, that guy that can go up there and high point the ball and make those big catches. I'd be all for that. But I do think that, when you look at the roster, there probably are other needs there, but with the way the free agency and things are working out, getting a rookie in the draft at wide receiver is probably the best route to go. So I'd be all for that.
So the Dolphins were kind of in a weird situation last year, right? Where you had Tyreek Hill, an absolute volume monster, and then you had Jaylen Waddle right there too. But Josh, I was a little surprised to see how they struggled to get someone like Braxton Berrios involved. They struggled to get they struggled to have a tight end. We'll just say that. They targeted the tight ends, I think, 54 times throughout the entire year. Durham Smythe, I think, had 46 of those. Julian Hill, maybe like 9 of those times. And the entire impression we have about this Dolphins offense is they need another weapon. They need another weapon. Keep helping out Tua with getting him more weapons. But I mean, Josh, think back to the last 2 years, and I go back to that Baltimore Ravens game 2 years ago, right? At week 3, that excellent week 2, sorry. One of the two. And it was just kind of sitting here in awe, like, wow, like Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle combined for 23 receptions on like 27 targets. How can this efficiency continue? How can this volume stay so pat? Considering that and considering how, I don't want to say unlikely, and Tua can do it, he's done it, but considering how this offense doesn't really shift into a third gear with that third player, do you think that a wide receiver would be that best option to improve this Miami Dolphins offense? Like, that is what they need, is that big body? Because it sounds like a lot of fun to say, but is there any proof in that pudding?
Yeah, I don't know that there is. And I mean, it definitely sounds fun to say. I think we all kind of suggested that Mike Gesicki could be that big bodied slot wide receiver when he was here, right? Cedric Wilson's a little taller than some of these other guys. And I think I've written down 296 yards, 3 touchdowns this season. So, I mean, when you have him only less than 300 yards, Berrios 238 yards and a touchdown. I mean, you definitely need someone to step up. So I can sit here and say that the next year could be bringing in a big body tight end, like that, a Dalton Kincaid or something like that, or bringing in a guy like Brian Thomas. But as I think you want to talk about, Jake, there's some players on this roster that we could definitely be targeting more in the passing game and could open things up with that speed that they have.
So that's kind of where I'm sitting, because Miami targeted tight ends, I pulled up my notes here, 52 times last year. The Broncos were second to last at 62 times. Something that I thought was pretty surprising is that Miami's offense actually targeted running backs the 5th most among all teams last year. That's with Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle being your guys. So the Dolphins were looking for answers. Something that I thought was super interesting, Devon Achane was targeted 3.4 times per game when he got going. I think there was that game, the Titans game, he was targeted 10 times. I'm curious to think if maybe Miami's final gear here could be that running back position. The one thing we continue to preach but not practice is the idea that the Dolphins have zero money to work with. No monies to work with this offseason. They're going to need to find these solutions elsewhere. We can't pay Cedric Wilson another $7 million to do nothing. I don't know if they can pay Braxton Berrios another $6 million to have 1 reception a game, to get hit stick, to do 3 backflips in the air and still get the first down. But that's not a smart way of using money. I wonder if you look at a situation where Alvin Kamara last year was targeted an insane 6.6 times per game last year. Targeted 14 twice, which helped my fantasy team quite a bit. I'm not saying they have to go that crazy with Achane. You have an absolute stud 1A and 1B and Hill and Waddle, unless you trade Waddle. But what about averaging 4 targets a game to Devon Achane? I think that might be a solid, third option for this offense. There were 15 running backs last year that averaged 4 targets a game. McCaffrey, Eckler, obviously, Breece Hall. But I mean, even guys like Rashad White, Ramondre Stevenson had 4 targets per game. So as we get closer to the, free agency and the draft, what are your thoughts on maybe kind of leaning into this running back group? Because one number that sticks out to me and kind of pops out of my eyes, Raheem Mostert was targeted just about 2 times per game last year. Early in the year, we saw him have some really strong moves on some just dump off passes against the Broncos, situations like that. But by the end of the year, man, he wasn't doing a lot in the passing game whatsoever, which kind of came to a surprise for me.
Yeah, I mean, when you were saying 1A and 1B with Waddle and Hill, the first thing I thought you were talking about was our running back unit, right? Because that's kind of what we had with Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. I was really surprised when you said the 5th most targets among wide receivers in the NFL, because that's
running
a little bit running backs. Yeah, sorry. But for me, I think you lean on Achane more. I mean, 27 to 37 targets, 197 yards, 3 touchdowns. Again, that 3 touchdowns was just as much as Cedric Wilson had in the passing game, same as Raheem Mostert. My question is, how is he divvying up these touches, right? Because late in the season, Jeff Wilson seemed to be that guy that was always getting the targets in the passing game. And that, to me, I would much rather see go to an Achane or a Mostert and things like that. And another guy we got to throw out there, Alec Ingold. I mean, that's the guy that we talked about time and time again, how he needs to get more involved. I think he's technically a running back, right? Can we not talk about him in this? 13 to 16 targets, 119 yards. I mean, you're looking at these guys. They could have more production than that. They have that speed, the explosiveness, and the willingness. So I do think you rely on these running backs a lot more, but they definitely need to bring in a tight end. I mean, we thought that was the cheat code for a Mike McDaniel offense. And it turns out he's just like, whatever. We need Durham Smythe, and that's all we need. Julian Hill, right? Julian Hill looks solid. So, yeah, man, I think we lean on these running backs a lot more in the passing game, and hopefully they can use that speed to open things up for the other guys, because that's going to be the way for the Dolphins to take this thing to the next level.
Devon Achane averaged 3.4 targets per game. Raheem Mostert at 2.1 targets per game. There's someone that I actually completely forgot actually played a decently big role in the receiving game. Do you have any guesses here? Their
Ahmed? Yes, Salvin Ahmed. I do have it right.
2.6 targets a game. I cannot believe, we spent so long talking about this guy's not really going to make the roster. But man, Raheem Mostert wasn't really involved in the passing game. Jeff Wilson wasn't involved in the passing game. Have we completely forgotten that Salvin Ahmed, bless his heart, he's really worked his ass off to be in the NFL, undrafted guy. He doesn't have all the skills, but I mean, he was a pretty solid part of this offense. And I mean, he had some pretty big runs on the outside. Kind of reminded me like what Justice Hill was doing with the Dolphins as a member of the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, I was looking up these numbers, and I honestly forgot about Salvin Ahmed as well. I think he might be a free agent this year. Hopefully, he's a guy that you'd like to have back, right, on a cheap deal to just be like you mentioned, a pass catcher, 16 to 23 targets, 88 yards, a touchdown. I mean, he did make some plays last season, so yeah, I was definitely surprised by him. Yeah, so dude, did you say to tackle a Mostert?
Yeah, I wanted to call him Mostert 1.5 to stick with the joke, but I don't know if that. But just kind of someone who's going to stick around. He fits with the system so well. The Dolphins can't really play around, and I don't even know if you can, with a smile on your face, draft even a running back in the 6th or 7th round, just because of how limited this team is with having the fewest players on the books for the 2024 season at the moment. You have Jeff Wilson under contract. That's going to be a tough one. You have Raheem Mostert under contract. The guy just led the league in touchdowns. I don't think that contract's being touched whatsoever. He should ask for more money. Very tough being a running back. And then you got Devon Achane on that rookie deal. Bringing in someone like Salvin Ahmed on that cheap might be the best option. And then you have a couple guys, Ahmed and Achane, where you can kind of work in and out as that number 3 option. I'm not saying that Achane can be, or even Ahmed can be in a consistent number 3 option, but just having that role in place where if somebody gets hurt, if an opportunity rises, it's not like, oh God, what are we going to do? And then we're just going to pray that Cedric Wilson throws or runs the way that Tua's throwing the ball. So Dolphins Twitter doesn't start World War III. Outside of that, we might be doomed.
Yeah, and we got to throw Chris Brooks' name out there, right? Isn't he still? I think he's still part of this. I know he didn't really do much in the past game and things like that, but he is a guy that we were pretty hyped about as an undrafted free agent. But yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued right now because I know a lot of people were sitting there comparing Devon Achane and some of his skill set and how Tyreek Hill was a running back in college, right? Made the switch to receiver, and I'm just picturing Devon Achane, motion out into the slot. You maybe never Raheem Mostert doing that little, the one where he goes to the sideline to draw the linebacker out, and it's just causing nightmares for the defense. So I hope they lean into that because I do think Devon Achane getting more touches, even Raheem Mostert, I think that would be good because, like you said, we don't need to rely on Cedric Wilson any more than we already have.
Yeah, this just kind of boils back to I don't buy that the whole idea that the Dolphins need another offensive weapon. I buy that they need a lot of offensive linemen that can make everything work a little better, where you can't just kind of lean into your three-party tricks. How many times can you make the dollar flip upside down without the entire defense knowing what you're doing? And that's kind of what happened to the team this year. That's why, man, I don't know if it's the big body. If the Dolphins would be happy to spend that first-round pick on someone like Brian Thomas Jr., if you could kind of load up in the trenches, get like a center, and then be a maniac and maybe someone on the edge if in the second, or if you want to move back up, that seems like the quickest, most effective way to kind of build this team forward. And two, man, if the Dolphins give Tua that contract, it's going to get expensive. If you're going to give Jaylen Waddle the contract, it's going to get expensive. This has only been 1 year. Adding another wide receiver doesn't really fit that kind of rhythm, that pace the Dolphins are trying to build, where if Tua's making $50-60 million against the salary cap, you're not going to have money to bring in massively paid wide receivers because he's going to have to carry more of the workload. Cough, cough, look at what Patrick Mahomes is doing. Disclaimer, I'm not comparing the two.
No, we did compare. A lot of Dolphins Twitter was comparing to, though, a little bit ago, right? It just seems like last year we were all sitting
our most viewed show is titled "It Just Took 1 Week for Tua to match Patrick Mahomes in MVP odds."
Oh man, that's amazing. I love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah, I don't know where they go from here, Jake. And I like what you said, how you don't know that they necessarily need another offensive player, because I think it was a few pods ago when we were with Merrick, he said something about bringing in another weapon for Tua, and I just kind of almost scoffed at the idea because the guy is Jaylen Waddle and he has Tyreek Hill. I mean, what more do you truly need to take it to the next level? I mean, we're talking about Patrick Mahomes to our blue in the face, and we know what type of weapons he's executed with. So, whatever it is, man, they got to figure it out. I feel like our window is slowly starting to close, and I just feel like that sunken, defeat and desperation just starting to sink in. So, dude, we got a long way though before the season starts, and I'm just glad to be able to sit here and talk about the Dolphins with you, man.
That's why I'm taking my highlighter and it's going to leak through like 7 pages. I think Devon Achane can be that guy where you can lean into running a game that kind of, you still leverage Raheem Mostert. You have Chris Brooks. That way you can be comfortable if there needs to be a game, he gets 6-7 targets, has that Sproles-like game. I think the Dolphins can do a lot with that. We saw how excited McDaniel was to draft someone like Achane. So I guess we will just have to wait and see what the Dolphins decide to do there. Joshua, before we wrap up, I just want you to shake your crystal ball. What's going to be this next thing to drop here for the Miami Dolphins? Is it going to be something we're going to hear about Christian Wilkins related? Is there going to be another move the team is going to make to start freeing up some money? We're hearing rumbles about Xavier Howard isn't willing to take a pay cut, yada, yada, yada. What's going to be this next, let's say, acorn or nugget of information that we're going to be yapping about?
I was going to say the 2 extension just to watch a world burn. Can I go with that? I mean, I don't know if that's going to be it, but yeah, we'll go with the 2 extension. It's just going to, top 5 money, melt people's brains, and Twitter's going to be an absolute cesspool for the next couple months.
They did say they wanted to get it done sooner rather than later, so that's interesting, man. I think you might be onto something with the 2 extension, and it would instantly free up, $10 to $12 million in cap space that the Dolphins can start just inching closer to that number. I do think after that, finding $8 million in the cushion, they're at like 45-ish. So we'll see what happens. But that is it. Go enjoy your weekend. It's starting to get a little warmer up here in the north, but everyone down in the south, just keep enjoying that sun for us up north. That's all the time we have today on another Dolphins podcast. Thank you all for joining us. We will be back early next week, but until then, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.